Carl Harper wiped the last streak of floor polish from the lab tiles and glanced at the clock. The neon digits glowed 10:17 p.m. Another long night, another empty corridor. The research facility was nearly silent, save for the hum of machines and the occasional beep of a distant monitor. Most of the scientists had gone home hours ago, leaving only the security crew and Carl to maintain the building's strange, antiseptic order. He adjusted the strap of his worn utility belt, feeling the familiar comfort of familiarity. Cleaning was simple, predictable, unlike raising Lily, which was anything but. His daughter's laughter and chatter filled the small apartment above their modest home, but it also filled him with a constant, gnawing worry. She was clever, kind, and far too curious for her own good. He had promised himself she would never be in danger, but here he was, in a building full of secrets and machines he barely understood, while a storm of problems brewed quietly beyond the walls. Carl moved toward the west wing to mop near the cryogenic storage labs. He had just finished when a sudden vibration shook the floor beneath his boots. A low hum filled the air, resonating in his chest. His heart skipped a beat. That wasn't normal. The building's security alarms should have triggered. He looked up and froze. Outside the massive glass windows of the courtyard, a glowing vessel hovered silently. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Sleek, oval-shaped with shifting iridescent lights that danced along its hull. No sound of engines, no rumble of fuel. Just hovering, as if the air itself had bent to hold it in place. Carl's first instinct was to duck behind the mop closet. The next was to grab his phone and call security, but he couldn't take his eyes off it. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, each more impossible than the last. Then, the vessel's surface rippled like liquid glass and figures emerged. Tall, ethereal beings with skin that shimmered in shades of silver and blue. Their limbs were elongated, elegant, and their faces were smooth, almost featureless, except for two glowing points where eyes should have been. They moved with grace, silent and deliberate toward the facility doors. Carl swallowed hard. He had read about alien life in books as a child, dreamed of meeting beings from another world. But this was real and terrifying. The scientists had gone home. Only Carl and a handful of security guards remained. The guards shouted into their radios, but the aliens made no move toward them. Instead, they paused in the courtyard, their glowing forms bending the light around them in strange patterns. One of them raised a limb, and a soft sound rippled through the air. It was a sequence of tones, pure and musical, unlike anything Carl had heard before. The guards panicked. They shouted orders, tried to aim their non-lethal stun weapons, but the aliens ignored them. A vibration, subtle but undeniable, emanated from the vessel. The guards dropped their weapons involuntarily, as if compelled by the sound. Carl, strangely, did not feel fear. Instead, a deep curiosity stirred inside him. He had spent countless hours observing patterns, listening to tones, studying sequences in machines. Maybe, just maybe, he could understand this. He stepped forward, cautious, keeping the mop bucket as a shield in front of him. He mimicked the alien's tones with his voice, unsure if he would sound ridiculous. To his shock, one of the aliens paused, tilting its head in his direction. The others mirrored the gesture. Something inside Carl clicked. The aliens were listening, not just hearing but listening. Over the next several minutes he experimented, replicating gestures and sounds. Each attempt was met with subtle responses, tiny shifts, vibrations, echoes of the tones. It was not perfect, but it was enough to communicate the simplest of ideas. Carl pointed to himself and said, "Human." The alien bent forward slightly, almost bowing, and emitted a sound that Carl interpreted as acknowledgement. By the time security had regained some composure, Carl had already begun a dialogue. The aliens' language was not words, at least not as humans knew them. It was a blend of sound, movement, and light patterns, all intertwined. But Carl discovered something extraordinary. It wasn't just about intelligence or advanced technology. It was about attention, observation, and emotion. Every gesture, every tone carried intention, and Carl could sense it. The scientists arrived in a rush, alerted by the alarms finally going off. They were frantic, shouting and waving at the aliens. But their words, their frantic explanations, fell flat. The aliens ignored them completely, their focus entirely on Carl. One of the researchers, Dr. Elena Voss, approached Carl, her eyes wide. "Carl, what are you doing? Step back. You don't know." "I think they want me to understand," Carl said quietly, his eyes fixed on the shifting patterns of light and sound. I think I can." Elena's face contorted in disbelief. "You're just a janitor. They chose me," Carl said simply. Hours passed. Carl sat cross-legged on the floor, mimicking tones, twisting his body into positions that mirrored the aliens' movements. Slowly, a rudimentary understanding formed. He could ask simple questions: peace, friend, danger. Each was met with subtle nods or vibrations. The aliens seemed to grow more relaxed in his presence, even curious. He realized the aliens were here for observation. They had been studying Earth for centuries, silently watching human behavior, but never expected a single human to communicate on this level. Carl, a janitor and single father, had bridged the gap. By midnight, the aliens made a series of rapid gestures, accompanied by complex tones. Carl's head spun trying to replicate them, but he managed the essence. He pointed to his chest and then to the aliens and uttered the words carefully: "We come in peace." The aliens paused. Light shimmered along their bodies, creating patterns Carl had never seen. And then, with a final, resonant sound, they bowed slightly. The message was clear, they understood. The scientists were stunned. Security guards stared, mouths agape. But Carl remained calm, seated on the cold lab floor, exhausted but exhilarated. The impossible had happened. Humanity had made contact, and the aliens had chosen him to speak for Earth. The alien leader, if it could be called that, extended a limb toward Carl. Its gesture was intricate, almost ceremonial, a pattern of lights and movements that felt deeply respectful. Carl mirrored it, unsure if he would succeed. The alien responded with a shimmer of approval. A sudden thought struck Carl. "Why me?" he whispered. The alien emitted a sound that resonated in his chest, vibrating with emotion he could not name. It was not about intelligence, strength, or technology. It was about perception, patience, empathy, the qualities humans often overlooked, but that Carl had in abundance. His life as a father, raising Lily alone, had honed these qualities without him realizing it. He glanced at the monitor showing Lily asleep at home through the facility's daycare camera. He felt a surge of determination. If he could understand these beings, he could protect her and ensure humanity did not make a mistake in its first contact with another species. Hours turned into early morning. The aliens did not attack. They did not threaten. They simply observed, responded, and taught in their own way. Carl's connection with them deepened. Each pattern, each tone, each subtle movement became a bridge. He could sense their curiosity, their respect growing. Finally, the vessel's glow shifted, brighter now, almost radiant. Carl knew what it meant. The aliens were signaling the end of this phase of contact. They would depart, but not without leaving a message. Carl replicated the gestures and tones as best as he could, capturing the essence of gratitude, trust, and an invitation. Humanity must continue to learn, observe, and grow. The aliens retreated to their vessel, which lifted silently from the courtyard. Carl stood in awe, watching as the shimmering craft rose into the sky, leaving a trail of ethereal light that painted the city in hues of silver and blue. Scientists swarmed him, shouting questions, cameras flashing, drones recording every moment. But Carl barely noticed. He had done something extraordinary, something no one had expected. Elena approached him again, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "Carl, that was incredible. You actually spoke to them." Carl shook his head, exhausted. I didn't speak, I listened. I tried to understand. That's all any of us can do. The media would later call him a hero. The world would marvel at the fact that a janitor had been the first human to communicate with an alien species. But Carl knew the truth. It wasn't heroism in the traditional sense. It was patience, observation, empathy, qualities every human possessed but few recognized as powerful. As he left the facility, mop and bucket in hand, Carl glanced at the night sky. Somewhere out there, the aliens hovered, watching, curious. Humanity had been noticed, and he had been the one to make them see that humans were more than just their technology, their weapons, or their politics. They were capable of connection, understanding, and respect. He thought of Lily, of her laughter, of her questions about stars and distant worlds. Someday, he realized, she might speak their language too, and humanity's story would continue, shaped not by conquest or fear, but by the quiet power of listening and understanding. Carl walked home through the empty streets, his heart full, mind racing. The ordinary world seemed smaller now, but also more alive. For the first time, he understood that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. And in the sky above, the alien vessel shimmered, a silent promise that the universe was paying attention. Carl woke to the soft hum of the city outside his apartment window, but sleep felt distant. He had only closed his eyes for a few hours, yet his mind was already tangled in patterns of light, gestures, and sounds he had learned from the aliens. Even though the glowing vessel had vanished into the night sky, its presence lingered in his thoughts. Humanity had been noticed, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he had been chosen. He prepared breakfast quietly for Lily, who sat at the small kitchen table, her hair still messy from sleep. She yawned and rubbed her eyes, blinking at him. "Dad, did you dream about work again?" she asked. Carl smiled gently. "Something like that," he said, trying to hide the excitement in his voice. He didn't want to worry her or make the day feel strange before school. But that morning, the world itself seemed different. News alerts flashed across every screen. People had seen the lights in the sky. Scientists and journalists flooded the streets outside the research facility, speculating wildly about the vessel and its occupants. Social media erupted with theories and questions. And in the midst of it all, Carl felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He knew the aliens had not just been curious observers, they had been testing, and their test was far from over. By late morning, he received a call from Dr. Elena Voss. She sounded urgent, though she tried to keep her tone professional. "Carl, they've returned. The vessel is in Earth orbit. The government wants you to come immediately." Carl's stomach tightened. He glanced at Lily, who was building a small spaceship out of cardboard. "I'll be back soon, Pumpkin, don't worry." Her eyes lit up. "Are they aliens again?" "Yes," he said with a small smile, "and they want to talk." The ride to the research facility felt unreal. Traffic slowed around them as if the city itself had sensed something extraordinary. Carl's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind rehearsing what he had learned the night before. The gestures, the tones, the vibrations, they had felt natural when he was calm, observant, and patient. But now, in the presence of officials and scientists, he wondered if he could still connect the same way. He entered the facility and was led through reinforced corridors to a secure observation deck. The vessel floated silently above the city, its surface shimmering as though it were alive. Military personnel and scientists crowded the room, but all attention shifted the moment the hatch opened and the aliens appeared. Unlike before, this time they moved with purpose. The lead alien approached Carl, its luminous form radiating calm authority. Its gestures were intricate, a sequence of lights and sounds that twisted and flowed through the air. Carl studied them carefully, matching each movement as best as he could. He realized quickly that the alien's language was more than words. It was emotion, thought, and intention combined. Their patterns shifted based on the feelings behind them: fear, curiosity, trust, and caution all altered the way they communicated. Carl sensed that this time they were trying to convey urgency. The room was tense. Officials whispered nervously, some shaking their heads at what seemed like nonsense. But Carl understood. Another species, far more advanced, had misinterpreted Earth's signals as hostile. A galactic conflict could begin if humans failed to respond correctly. The aliens needed him to negotiate, to prevent a disaster that no weapons or diplomacy could solve alone. Carl felt a chill run down his spine. The responsibility was enormous. But he drew on what had served him well before: patience, observation, empathy. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. Then he began to communicate, using tones and gestures, responding to the alien patterns with careful precision. He could feel their approval, subtle but unmistakable. Minutes stretched into an hour as he worked, exchanging complex ideas with the aliens. He sensed their worry, frustration, and relief as he guided the conversation. They spoke of another species, far from Earth, misreading humanity's signals as a threat. Carl replicated the alien gestures to convey peace, curiosity, and the desire to avoid conflict. Then the alien leader performed a series of rapid movements, intricate and almost overwhelming. Carl's mind raced to match them, finally landing on the essence of the message. We must act now to prevent war. He turned to the assembled scientists and officials. It's not enough to show force or issue statements, he said. They need to feel that we mean no harm. That requires understanding, not weapons. A scientist scoffed. You're a janitor. How can you? Carl ignored him. He returned his focus to the aliens, matching tone, gesture, and intention. The vessel pulsed in response, sending ripples of light across the observation deck. Slowly, the alien leader relaxed, then extended a limb in what Carl interpreted as a request. He must travel to the other species, convey humanity's peaceful intentions, and prevent miscommunication. Carl's heart raced, traveling with aliens, representing humanity. It sounded impossible, but the look in the aliens' luminous eyes was clear. They trusted him. Humanity's fate, at least in this instance, rested on him. The next hours were a blur. Carl, with Lily safely entrusted to relatives for the moment, was fitted with a minimal translator device designed by the aliens. It wasn't a technology to speak words. It enhanced his perception, helping him understand subtle vibrations and light patterns as language. Soon he was aboard the vessel, floating silently above Earth as it accelerated into orbit. Inside the ship, Carl marveled at the alien architecture. Walls shimmered like liquid, floors responded to his steps, and corridors twisted in ways that defied normal geometry. He struggled not to be distracted. His task was far more urgent than exploring. The aliens guided him, teaching nuances in their language that could only be perceived through observation and feeling. Carl absorbed it quickly. He realized the key was not to memorize gestures but to sense intention. If he felt the meaning behind a movement, the correct response would come naturally. After hours of training, the vessel emerged near another alien species, station. Their forms were starkly different, angular, rigid, and emitting harsh, discordant sounds. They were clearly wary and aggressive, interpreting the presence of the Earth vessel as a threat. Carl's pulse quickened. He stepped forward, extending his limbs in the first gestures he had learned, tones of peace, gestures of curiosity and respect. The station's inhabitants paused, confused by the unfamiliar communication. Carl sensed tension, suspicion, and fear radiating from them. He mirrored these signals with calm tones, showing understanding without aggression. Minutes felt like hours. Carl matched their every movement, listened to every vibration, and responded with patience and empathy. Slowly, the tension began to ease. The rigid forms hesitated, then mirrored Carl's gestures in a tentative acknowledgement. Finally, after a complex exchange, Carl transmitted the essence of humanity: curiosity, hope, and a desire for peace. The opposing species' tones softened and they withdrew threatening stances. Carl felt a wave of relief wash over him. War had been avoided, not by weapons, not by orders, but by patience, empathy, and observation. The vessel returned to Earth. Carl was exhausted but exhilarated. The alien's language had given him power, but not the kind most humans valued. It was power born of understanding. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, but he had proven that even a single human could make a difference. When he stepped out of the ship, the crowd outside the research facility erupted in cheers. Scientists and military leaders stared in awe. Carl's appearance was unremarkable. He was a janitor, a single father, but now he carried the weight of humanity's respect among alien civilizations. Carl smiled at the crowd, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of Lily, waiting at home, oblivious to the extraordinary events unfolding around them. She would be proud someday, he thought, and maybe, one day, she too would speak the language of the stars. The aliens hovered silently above the city one last time, a shimmering reminder of the universe's acknowledgement. Then, with a grace that defied physics, they vanished into the blackness of space. Carl returned home late that night. Lily was asleep, her drawings of spaceships scattered across the floor. He tucked her in gently, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "Dad," she murmured. "Yes, Pumpkin." "You're a hero, right?" Carl chuckled softly. "Not a hero, just someone who listened." She smiled in her sleep, and Carl watched over her, thinking of the vast galaxy beyond. Humanity had been noticed, and if a janitor could make a difference, maybe the universe had underestimated what humans were capable of. Carl finally lay down himself, exhausted but content. He knew the future was uncertain, full of challenges and unknown dangers. But he also knew that humanity had something unique: empathy, curiosity, and resilience. And those qualities, quiet, unassuming, and often overlooked, could make the impossible possible. Above the city, the stars shone brighter than ever. Carl Harper, janitor, father, and accidental ambassador, had shown the universe that humans were worthy of respect. And somewhere out there, the aliens remembered his name.